I'm Eldin Udell, and this is New Media One, where we're dedicated to providing information for you. And as you know, we are in the hurricane season. We just saw the passage of Tropical Storm Isaac. Fortunately, Antigua and Barbuda and the Leeward Islands, we were not really impacted by the passage of that storm. But when we think of the hurricane season, and especially this part of the hurricane season, we have to keep in mind that we need to be prepared. And who better to tell us about preparation than NODS, the National Office of Disaster Services here in Antigua and Barbuda. And with me is Mr. Philmore Mullin. He is director of NODS here in Antigua and Barbuda. Good day, sir. How are you doing?
Good day, I'm fine.
All right. Before we get into hurricane preparedness, let's talk a bit about NODS for persons who are not aware of the work that you guys do here and how important the work you do here at NODS is for the nation.
Okay, well, the National Office of Disaster Services was established in 1984. However, in 1991 or thereabout, it was reviewed and rebranded, and that's when some amount of prominence in terms of staffing and so on, and a whole new effort to professionalize the organization came about. We've had Mrs. Cornelia Michael, then you had Mr. Denali, Mrs. Julian, and now myself in terms of background. National Office of Disaster was a government entity established to execute on behalf of the government the whole issue of disaster management in its totality. That includes preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. However, I must say that in terms of recovery and mitigation, those are perhaps the two weakest links in the system. Since we have a tradition of preparedness and responding, and so it is very difficult to get the other entity, because the actual mitigation and recovery part of it is requires more collaboration, and those assignments are already established those responsibilities already established within other entities, and so to get them to move away from the traditional way of doing things to a more scientific, tested and proven methodology is proven to be quite difficult. We have made some progress, but in terms of where we need to be at now, in light of the fact that Antigua and Barbuda has signed on to some very important protocols, starting way back with the Grenada Declaration. There's a CARICOM agreement that follows that and put those things in context. You also have something called the ISDR arrangements, basically indicating that all countries that sign a document will implement certain things to ensure that the 4 pillars of disaster management are executed within their countries. From a staffing point of view, we have limited staffing in terms of capacity. We have 1, 2, 3 persons trained in disaster management, and we have some other specialists in terms of public relations, GIS, information system, telecommunications, and so on. But the workload far outweighs the capacity of the staffing, and so we work sometimes very long hours, and in addition to that, you have the way the system is structured. It can be quite challenging at times. You have the national system, where you have the cabinet, followed by a national disaster council. Then a part of that council, you have an executive, and then you have the secretariat, which is NODS, and then you have the district disaster volunteer system. But we have, by virtue of treaty arrangement, Antigua and Barbuda is also a sub-regional focal point as part of the CDMA mechanism. So we do have responsibilities for Montserrat, St. Kitts, Nevis, Anguilla, and BVI. And so while we were looking about Antigua's business over the last 2 days, at 3 o'clock this morning, I was in discussion with my colleagues in the focal point to ensure that they're okay as well. The challenges we face are quite significant, because we watched over the last 15, maybe 20 years, some changes in the development process. Some of it is positive, some of it is negative. Someone once said to me, the advent of heavy-duty equipment into the development process can be a blessing in disguise or a terror in the process. And we've seen wherever there is indiscriminate use of heavy-duty equipment as part of development, there is going to be a negative impact somewhere down the road. And we've seen that. We have seen flooding in areas that never flooded before as a result of that kind of intervention. And unfortunately, we are not able to fix these problems as fast as they're developing. And so while we're making some progress on the back end, we are moving away. So we're not narrowing the gap in any way. The skill sets of the NODS staff had to be very diverse and can get very complex very, very quickly. And so we utilize, for example, geographic information system software to tell us what's vulnerable where and what is likely to be the scale of impact in a particular community by a particular hazard and so on. And so we use that information as part of our planning to determine where low-lying areas are, how many households are in what we call high-risk flooding zones, as the case may be, or flood-prone maps to determine the level of impact that is likely if a particular amount of rain fall in a particular period of time. And this is done in relation with the information that we get from the Met Office, and it relates to the history of rainfall across Antigua. Can it be enhanced? Yes, because there's quite a bit of data held by the Ministry of Agriculture that is in paper form. If we could get that digitalized and bring that into the historical data, we'll get a better mix. And so the models will be more realistic. And so we've had to utilize what we have for the time being. A lot of people don't know this, and we don't normally publicize this, but we do what is called monitoring of hotspots. There are certain locations across the island that have, for lack of a better term, disasters waiting to happen. We will monitor them, and when it gets to a point where we figure that the threat is above a particular threshold, we will seek to hand it over to the agency with responsibility for that particular type of situation. Case in point, there is a gaping hole beneath the road around the corner from the beach bar at Darkwood. You can't see it unless you go on a boat on seaside. We notice what appears to be a crack from the top of the hole going up to the base of the asphalt, which suggests that the support material is significantly weaker than what it was. And at some point in time, there may be a requirement for intervention. And so we handed that back to Public Works for them to continue the monitoring and to look at how they could best design a solution for that. In the Crabs Hill area, for example, there is a situation where in the last 15 years or so we've seen a significant amount of sand and boulders washing down when they have extreme weather conditions across the community. And the cleanup bill is becoming more and more expensive. We have done an analysis and discussion with Public Works, looking to see how best we could design a reduction in the amount of material that gets down to the community or total elimination. And so that is a work in progress. We also monitor two spots in the Fig Tree Drive area. One where they had some landslide after they had widened the road some years ago, and a huge boulder ended up in the road. That area is still very vulnerable, and there seems to be, our preliminary investigation suggests that there's still minor slippage. It is not moving fast enough at this point in time to raise any alarms, but it is likely that a constant monitoring will be able to see if there's any major movement before something really, really dangerous happens. There was a landslide in Omar, west of the Canopy Tours infrastructure there. And we brought someone in from the University of West Indies to look at it, and he'd suggested that the design of the drainage system in that area is the cause, the primary cause why we had the landslide, because the drain was terminated and turned, excuse me, turned over the slope, the steepest part of the slope, which created an imbalance with the water constantly going on that volume at that location. And what happened is that the center of the area where the water was constantly flowing, the composition changed over time, became heavier. And so once it rained, the area in the center might have been 2, maybe 3 times heavier than its adjacent parts, and so it just slipped. That has not been fixed yet, and if it continues, it's likely we'll have another slip sometime in the future. This time, though, if it slips, it will take out a portion of or all the road.
Now that we have an idea of, this was a learning experience for me too, because I'm sitting here listening to you, and I didn't know that your office is responsible for so many things, and actually has been doing so many things when it comes to disaster management here in Antigua and Barbuda, and I'm sure it's been very educational for our viewers. But now let us focus in on hurricane preparedness, because we have to face the reality of it. We are in the hurricane season and actually approaching the point of the hurricane season where we'll be seeing a lot more storms passing our way. Let's talk about hurricane preparedness here in Antigua and Barbuda. Where do we start?
Well, the hurricane preparedness really starts with an analysis of the threat that the hurricane brings to the landscape of Antigua and Barbuda. In a nutshell, we're talking about strong winds, and you know that from hurricanes you can get severe rainfall that can cause flooding. You can get landslides and storm surge or strong waves. And those are the major ones that we focus on. And so out of that, you no doubt be aware that there's efforts to ensure that the way we design our roofs is an issue. And so we work along with our partners across the region and further afield to ensure that that scientific information is built into the whole development process, and we inform people as to what they should do in order to protect their roofs. If you deal with infrastructure and come down to the family, it really starts with the design and construction of one's home, or any infrastructure development. One ought to take into consideration the impact that strong winds can have on the facility in total, its location in terms of flooding, landslide, and those kind of things, proximity to the sea. And so all of those things can really negatively impact on the structure. And those, scientifically, you need to build the antidote, so to speak, into that process. The whole issue of family members, and if we deal with the home first, we encourage people to have a family plan to start with. That is going to guide what you do. The composition of the family, their specific needs, likes and dislikes, and so on. All of that must be part of the plan in some shape or form. Then when you talk about needs in the home, there are members in the family, for example, that are on medication that will need their medication on a daily basis. If that is the case, one needs a plan for that. Do you have family members that have unusual eating habits, those diets and so on? All of that must be part of that. Because in an emergency, you may not have the luxury of taking care of those things the same way you would on a daily basis. The issue of ensuring that family members understand what to do when a watch is issued, when a warning is issued, and during the impact, and what to do immediately after is of critical importance. Now, the family plan cannot be done in isolation of what is happening at your workplace, because the absence of a family plan could impact negatively on your workplace, and vice versa. And so we always encourage people, and when we do our training, we make sure that they understand the parallel things that needs to be done. The extended family also needs to be a part of that, because if I am a single parent and I have to go to work and I work in an essential service, then I need to make those arrangements for my family so that I can go and provide that service. If I don't, then we have a problem. And so those issues need to be trashed out. We recommend that every family in Antigua and Barbuda should try and have at least one member in that family trained in first aid. It could mean the difference between life and death, depending on the particular type of incident. They need to be aware of what it is, that not just the country, but their community, and by extension their home and their workplace. What are those things that these important attachments to their lives are vulnerable to? And then build that into their planning process for home, office, and so on, even church. We also encourage members of the community to be part of their district disaster management system. It's their community. If they are vulnerable to lots of things, that's their vulnerability. Some communities are more vulnerable than others, and so they understand the uniqueness of their community, and they are the best person to deal with whatever problems they have from a disaster management standpoint in their community. And so we will train them. The training is free. Every member in the community who so desire have a right to serve on that committee. As long as they don't bring to the table things like their political persuasion, their religious beliefs, and all of those other things that can really cause division in an organization, we have no problems in training them and working with them. Where we have a problem is when those other elements start to impact negatively on the dynamics, then we may have to ask someone to leave the organization. But as long as they can work as a group in their community to do what is required and follow the guidelines that's laid down, everything will be fine. The question of specific preparation, apart from the first aid training, the issue of stocking up with foodstuff or getting shutters on your building and all of those things are of critical importance, as is the issue of the protection of valuable and important documentation. That now this could be hard copy or soft copy. One very important element of this whole process is the issue of waterproofing. You know, Eline, that I'm quite sure you have pictures from way back when. And if those pictures get destroyed in a disaster, you're not going to be able to recover them. And so we really encourage that waterproofing is of critical importance. There is something called the strongman concept that is not widely practiced in the Caribbean, but has proven to be very, very effective. If every government office had a strong room, and a strong room is could be as small as you want it based on your needs, or as big as you want it to be based on the size of your organization. It is a room within a room that is reinforced and designed specifically where you can put sensitive equipment like computers and all the rest of it, critical records and so on, and close the door. And even if the building roof goes, those things should be intact. We don't practice it widely, and I don't know why. Maybe we're not pushing it hard enough. You can have a strong room within your home. And so if push comes to shove and the roof start to go, you can go into that room, close the door, and you should be safe and survive the impact of a hurricane. The interrelationship between community members sometimes can be a hindrance or an asset. We know that neighbors are not always on good terms. However, when a disaster is upon us, we strongly recommend that differences are put aside for the sole purpose of life preservation. That is not always the case, but it is a necessity that could prove to be quite important. For example, if my roof is going, or my roof has been blown off and the eye passes and my neighbor's house is still intact, I should be able to rub on my neighbor's door and explain the situation with an expectation that I'll be taken in, as opposed to have to journey somewhere up the road in the dark, not knowing what's out there to try and get shelter.
Sorry for cutting you off, but my next question is, I'm listening to everything you're saying here about being prepared. This is very repetitive. We say it every year.
Yeah.
Every year, I think that us experiencing storms and going through the hurricane season is not something new. We do it every year. We have these types of programs. You guys work out very closely with local media, so persons are informed. So it leads me to my next question. Why still aren't we prepared? I know you're here listing all these stuff that we need to do, and persons watching this might be saying, yes, we know this already, but why aren't these same persons that are saying this prepared? Because we look at even with the recent tropical storm Isaac, persons waiting always to the last minute to get prepared, persons taking for granted the impact that a storm can actually have on the nation. What do you say to this?
Well, I was tempted to give you a local answer. My grandma would say that they hadn't. Maybe the question should be, why aren't people doing what they know? And I suppose that is the question. It is an issue that we haven't quite got our heads around yet. Some people, by nature, are that way. They wait until the last minute to do things. But unfortunately, when you really examine the situation closely, even though they practice that type of behavior, they are never ever prepared to deal with the consequences. And so that is one of the challenges that we face, and we'll have to maybe change our strategy to see how best we can get a larger percentage of society to act upon what it is they know, the information that is available. There was a time when we used to use examples of the past to seek to drive the message home, and we were told that perhaps we are scaring people, and then the whole issue of us being a tourism country was some part in that discussion. I don't necessarily share it, but I believe if we know about the past in terms of our impacts, maybe people might be a little bit more convinced that they need to take some actions for their own preservation in times of disasters. Unfortunately, I suspect that those who practice that type of behavior might be in a minority, but nonetheless, one injured party or one person losing his or her life is one too many.
Let's talk about the way we think sometimes. I'm looking back to the recent passage of Tropical Storm Isaac, person saying that, you know what, I got all prepared for nothing. You guys were on the television telling us rain is going to come, things that we should be doing, what we should expect. I stocked up my house with food, I made the necessary preparations, I lived in a low-lying area, I moved to an area that was safer, I moved my family out, I did everything that you're telling me that I need to do to be prepared for a storm, and I did it all for nothing. What do you say to that?
That's not true, because the same people that are making that claim, if we didn't do it and the storm had shifted closer to us and something happened, they would be the first to be screaming for our heads. And so we don't have that luxury of waiting till the last minute to make a decision. And maybe I need to spend some time and explain the operational implications. At 6 o'clock that morning, and I spoke to the Met Office, the bulletin that morning said that the storm was traveling at 20 to 25 miles an hour. given that speed, we calculated that the storm would have been on our doorstep by 3, 4 o'clock the next morning. And so we had to put those plans in place. However, once the plan was in place and acted upon, by 6 o'clock the same evening, they slowed down to 17 miles an hour, which means that it's going to pass at least another day or so. We couldn't then go back and say, look, those things we tell you to do, cancel. We had to leave those in place. And I am not sure that it won't happen again, because our operational guidelines stipulates that we ought to err on the side of caution every time. We have seen hurricanes that is traveling one direction, turn back, loop, go in another direction, loop, and come back. And maybe we can impress on the Met Office to show some of the more unusual tracks of the past. You might be saying a hurricane is coming and it's going to take a particular path. And sometimes they defy all the models that exist and do something totally opposite. And so when you have those things on the table and you have the responsibility to plan for an entire country to determine what course of action to take for their own safety, you cannot afford the luxury of waiting to see if this thing is going to slow down the next bulletin to start planning. And certainly you can't wait until the last minute to start issuing instructions that have logistical considerations that would take, in some cases, hours to be put in place. A simple case like saying to the transport board, okay, the emergency operations center is going to be activated at such and such a time, and we're going to need that initial quota of vehicles. These vehicles are not parked at the motor pool. They have to be summoned, the vehicles have to be brought into the motor pool, they have to be serviced, they have to be fueled, and then they have to be turned over to us. And so there are other planning considerations that have to go into the system that allows us to make those decisions in a timely manner, and we are not going to compromise those.
What do you think, what would you like to say to persons out there right now as we move on further into what I'd like to call the climax of the hurricane season when it comes to preparedness?
Well, it's probably in peak.
The peak, yes.
Because the history of hurricanes in Antigua suggests that early June is our best period. We understand that everyone has a right to free will. It is our constitutional rights. However, we also understand that the state have some responsibility for the protection of the citizens. And we don't take those rights very lightly. And so we have to ensure that the state's obligation to its citizens are executed in such a manner that every citizen have the opportunity to have access to information based on the facts as we know them, and that they give the information early enough to take the actions that are necessary so that they can protect themselves and their family, first of all, and the property, if that is possible. And so we cannot be complacent where this is concerned, because we take our responsibilities very seriously.
Now, for persons watching that would like to get in touch with NODS, they might have further questions, things that may not have been addressed in this interview. How does one get in touch with the National Office of Disaster Services here in Antigua and Barbuda?
Well, we do have several telephone numbers they can contact us. The primary one would be 462-4206. Once we get into that, you call that number. We have a system where if the number you call is busy, it will pick up the next one that is free. For international calls, there is the 562-2144 number. We do have government cell phones, senior officers, myself and the deputy. They are 464-8456 and 464-8457. Those would be the primary numbers. We have email address, which is NODS, @gmail.com. We do have a following and Facebook, and we're in the process of completing a website that will be published shortly.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Mullin, for your time here
No problem
with
at all.
us at New Media One. And you heard it there from the director of the National Office of Disaster Services here in Antigua and Barbuda. It's all about thinking safe and being prepared as we go into the peak of the hurricane season. I'm LD Nudell for New Media One.